Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. We're here for another discussion video. I'm here with the Archivist again, and today we have a topic that is probably the most popular topic in all of the lore, but we wanted to do a discussion format and an analysis on what, in concept, would it look like if Qui-Gon Jinn was the actual master of Anakin. I know the popular consensus in the lore, thanks to the Darth Plagueis novel, and then thanks to the fan base and Anakin himself, is that Qui-Gon Jinn would have been the absolute perfect Jedi master, or even Force-based master for Anakin. Whether or not they decided to pursue the Jedi path or not is also a topic of debate. But we wanted to look at it. What does that look like in function? We can talk about it endlessly. We can talk about how Plagueis and Palpatine believed that had Qui-Gon survived Naboo, that Anakin would have been trained in a manner where he threatened the Sith to a point where they were not confident that they could overcome it, which is extremely dangerous, especially when a Sith denotes something as a legitimate threat. That's not typical of them. So I'm going to go ahead and hand it over, and we'll get the ball rolling. What does Qui-Gon Jinn as Anakin's master look like? So go ahead, take it away.
All right. Hey, thanks for having me on again. I really appreciate it. Well, I think the first thing that usually comes up about Anakin and Qui-Gon's relationship is, well, how different it is from Anakin and Obi-Wan's relationship, in that Qui-Gon was the father figure that Anakin always needed and never had. Coming out of slavery on Tatooine and then just kind of being thrown straight into the Jedi Order, he didn't really have a right buffer, because he grew up with a mother, right? And he was used to more of like a home life. And the Jedi just didn't offer that there. So, and I think that was one of the biggest hangups for Anakin when he was starting out in his Jedi path, is the Jedi Order never felt like a real home for him. So, I mean, how can he learn about the Force and step into this destiny that he's allegedly supposed to have if he's not even sure, what his life is supposed to look like as a Jedi? He's not even comfortable there.
Yeah, that's a super interesting point. The fact that Anakin, he puts so much value into family, so that when he's inducted into an organization that is attempting to teach him to forego all of that, it's exceptionally difficult. And in the end, it sort of speaks to his continued value of family when he makes the ultimate sacrifice and decides to save his son over power and an order. And it's this idea that the Jedi were never able to take away how valuable family was to Anakin. Now, power was also valuable to Anakin, but not quite as much even as it was to have his loved ones. I know Obi-Wan says, he has a comment in the Revenge of the Sith novel that's kind of famous.
Oh, yeah.
On that Anakin would do anything for the ones that he loved, even if it meant, destroying something sacred to the Jedi. And in the end, he destroys the Jedi entirely because of something sacred to him, and that's family. So the big question posed again is, would Qui-Gon see this? Would Qui-Gon be that father figure that Anakin desperately needed, and that Obi-Wan was never able to fill because he was more of a peer, more of an equal, a brother, and not a father? So do you believe in your heart that Qui-Gon Jinn would have been that father that Anakin desperately wanted, and would have filled the hole that Palpatine would later use to manipulate and fill as a fake father? Would Qui-Gon Jinn leave the Jedi Order to train this boy and to essentially become a surrogate parent? What are your thoughts?
Oh, yeah. I don't think there's even a doubt about that. Dooku and Qui-Gon were of a similar mind, even though they followed different paths, had sort of a different take on how a Jedi should operate. They were of the same mind of what a Jedi's role is supposed to be, and Qui-Gon was even more radical in that regard. So, I mean, if Dooku leaves the Jedi Order to protect his home, his family on Sereno, Qui-Gon would undoubtedly see this motion by his master, and it would be a confirmation to him that it's okay to leave the Order, especially if it's in service to the Force. And Qui-Gon would have probably grown disillusioned with the Order. He already was at odds with the Council. But if the Council was starting to do things and make decisions that were in direct opposition to the will of the living Force, which we know that Qui-Gon obeys to beyond everything else, he's going to leave. Yeah, he's going to bail right out of there.
Mm-hmm. I know that they give him the ultimatum, essentially, in The Phantom Menace, and they tell Qui-Gon Jinn, no, you cannot train this boy. And the only reason that they submit eventually is because Qui-Gon died. So another big question that has always, persisted in my mind is, how does this continue if Qui-Gon lives? Does the Council hold strong? Do they, stand by their statement that they will not train Anakin? And do they allow Qui-Gon and Anakin to leave? And then another question to that is, how does that affect Obi-Wan? Because in my mind, I think that puts Obi-Wan back as a character and the Jedi that he ultimately becomes, because Qui-Gon's death is this defining moment for Kenobi. So do you think that the Council would have held firm on that assessment? And if they didn't, are they going to keep an eye on Qui-Gon? Because he's training the most powerful being in the galaxy. How did they react that there's this splinter faction of the Jedi? And do they keep an eye on that? Do they go against it? Do they take action to stop Qui-Gon from training Anakin? Do they go that drastic? What are sort of your insights there?
Well, let me ask you this. Excuse me. Do you think their decision about Anakin would have changed after the appearance of Darth Maul? Because if you think about it, Qui-Gon reports them. He says, I faced someone who's trained in the Jedi arts, and he accuses them of being a Sith. Now, the Council, obviously, at first, they're like, no way. The Sith have been extinct for 1,000 years. It's not possible. But after the battle on Naboo, there's a possibility that if Qui-Gon didn't die, right, he would have been able to report to them with Obi-Wan as a witness saying, oh yeah, this guy was definitely a Sith. Now, with the alleged Chosen One showing up at the same time that the Sith choose to reveal themselves, I think even the Jedi Council, as blind and arrogant as they were, probably wouldn't take fate slapping them right in the face and ignore it. What do you think about that?
I didn't even think of that as a part of the formula. I think you're absolutely right. I think that the Council would probably allow Anakin to be trained based on that fact alone. I think that they would still not trust Anakin, and I think that it's even possible that it could be brought into question if Maul was ever a Sith at all. Because I think a lot of the reason why they are like, yes, Maul was a Sith, is because Maul bests Qui-Gon Jinn in combat. And a normal Dark Jedi to defeat a Jedi Master, especially of Qui-Gon's caliber. A man trained by Dooku, the greatest swordsman potentially of that entire era, rivaled by Yoda alone. Do they believe that he was a Sith if he's bested that easily? And I think that a second time, with the clear indicator that Anakin has arrived and the Sith are making a move against him, I do believe eventually they come around to Maul being a Sith, but I also think that would be questioned.
I think it would be questioned right up until Sidious chooses to reveal himself. If I remember correctly, the first time Sidious reveals himself is when Dooku tells Obi-Wan about Darth Sidious. Do I have that right, or did he reveal himself sooner?
I don't know if it would go back that far, but I think as soon as they had confirmation that Dooku was a Sith, that they would, or I think that it would be called into question. And I think that Dooku is so arrogant that he would have wanted it to be known that he was in fact the Sith, not just a normal Dark Jedi,
Yeah, so I guess in that case, assuming Qui-Gon left the Order, and then they realized that Darth Sidious is out there is a Dark Lord of the Sith, Do you think the council would reach out to Qui-Gon?
I think that after the second engagement, they would have questioned him, but I think that they would have accepted Anakin. I think that that's the most likely scenario.
Right.
Yoda is someone who is willing to have his mind changed. We've seen this time and time again. We just saw it with the video that we posted just today. I don't know when this is going out, but the video we posted today is about Yoda's second vision in the Cave of Dagobah during the time of Empire Strikes Back.
That was a rough one.
Yeah, no, it's so much worse than Luke's somehow. And we know that Yoda can learn of his mistakes, is the point I'm trying to get to. And I think that they would have accepted Anakin to be trained by Qui-Gon as a Jedi, but Qui-Gon would have trained Anakin in the ways of the old Jedi, not in the ways of a Clone Wars Jedi. And I think the training would have gone well for the most part, except for when people talk about this topic, they miss one massive key detail. And that's something that I want to talk about in depth. And that is Anakin's desire for power.
Ooh, yeah. So one thing I'd love to kind of bring this back around to is discussing how Obi-Wan, by contrast, dealt with Anakin's lust for power. And that's to say he didn't deal with it very well. I don't think Anakin needed long lectures and, get berated every time he had these selfish feelings. I think Obi-Wan, we love him to death, but I think we can all agree he didn't do the greatest job at actually trying to connect with what Anakin really wanted on a personal level and guide him through those desires.
I think that Obi-Wan did as best a job as he possibly could have.
Absolutely, yeah, no question.
And I would even say that, and I know this might be a controversial choice, but I think even of the Jedi present after Qui-Gon dies, that Obi-Wan would probably still be the best master,
Yeah, absolutely. I can't think of another Jedi that would be as good for Anakin, because I feel like if he were trained by Mace Windu, he would have turned out worse off than if he was trained by Obi-Wan, and if Anakin was trained by someone as loose as, say Quinlan Vos, then, he would basically get nowhere, and he definitely wouldn't be as strong as he needed to be by Revenge of the Sith.
Right, and I don't want to make this out, like you're saying, to be like a complete bash on Obi-Wan, because I think that Obi-Wan, for what he was given, did such a good job. We're forgetting about the war hero, greatest Jedi that has ever lived, that is Anakin. Like, yes, he becomes Darth Vader, but as a Jedi, he's pretty exemplary.
He was. I mean, those two were the dynamic duo. I think the only problem comes in when you see that Anakin doesn't respect Obi-Wan's authority. He talks back to him. Like, that was a huge point of contention in, Attack of the Clones. Qui-Gon never would have tolerated that kind of disrespect.
No, there's a power struggle between the two of them. Anakin is so much more powerful than Obi-Wan, but Obi-Wan is so much wiser than Anakin.
Yep. And it's like Anakin. Yeah, he was never taught to respect that wisdom.
Right. And he doesn't even... Another big thing is Anakin, his training with Yoda is sort of hands-off too. I'm surprised that Yoda didn't take more of an interest in Anakin than he did. I know that Yoda is Grand Master and he's very busy, and especially during the tumultuous time of the Phantom Menace into Attack of the Clones, that Yoda is concerned with big things, but it's just a testament to how hands-off Yoda has been with Anakin, when in Attack of the Clones, it's that novel or it's some other novel where Anakin as a Padawan thinks he's better than Yoda in terms of lightsaber combat. And I think that just sort of shows us that Yoda has been absent a little bit.
Yeah, and it is kind of a shame, not to get too long into this sort of Yoda tangent, but I think it is kind of a shame that Yoda didn't have more of a vested interest. And I know that's because, and it was thoroughly explained, that Yoda and the Jedi Council didn't have as much input into Anakin's training because they didn't want it to look like he was getting special treatment. But the only issue is that in all of the comics and moments in like the Clone Wars show when Yoda and Anakin are interacting, they're really good together.
Yeah. I mean, Yoda is the first person that Anakin goes to after he gets visions of Padme dying. There's clearly some respect that has grown over the course of the Clone War between the two of them. But again, circling back to Qui-Gon and Anakin's relationship to power, I still think that Anakin would have struggled a lot. I think that Anakin as the chosen one is sort of inherently called to power. I think that there is something innately within Anakin that feels the need to become as powerful as he has to be. The Force has gifted him with this massive potential. It is Anakin's calling to seek out that potential. And I think that's so hard for someone like Qui-Gon to sort of teach, especially when an individual like Palpatine comes along and is like, yes, you need to seek out that power. This is your destiny. This is your this is your ethereal calling. You need to seek out that power. And it's all about how a Jedi uses their power. And where I even think Qui-Gon would have had a tough time is Anakin growing in power for the sake of being powerful, or is he growing in power for the sake of the betterment of the galaxy? And
I think
the answer is both. The answer is both in my mind.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that Qui-Gon would establish early in their training is as the chosen one. You said it earlier, he would have trained him in the ways of the old Jedi, listening to the will of the Force. And I really think that he would have led Anakin to the way the chosen one was meant to be by listening to its will. And if Qui-Gon taught Anakin the secret, if he was able to teach him that patience, to quiet his mind and emotions, to listen to what the Force wanted for him, then I feel like that power would have come naturally. Because if Anakin's listening and doing the will of the Force is going to supplement him as a result. I think we talked about this once in the Yoda discussion, where the Force, the light side, rewards Jedi who seek its will with the power that they need to exact its will.
Right. I mean, look at Luke. Look at how powerful Luke became. According to, George Lucas, he becomes the full potential of Anakin. Now, I've always said that it's my headcanon that Anakin's potential is bigger than Luke's. I've said that before, which when you question something George Lucas, the creator, has said, you always have to preface that with, this is my headcanon. This by no means is the reality of the situation. This is simply what I think when I read. But Luke embraces the will of the Force. He adopts the dark side teachings into the Jedi Order. Not that that's where they build the foundation of the new Jedi. That's of course not the case. But he doesn't shy away from what the Force is trying to teach him and call to him. And something that I want to sort of touch on in this discussion is we always talk about the impact that Qui-Gon would have on Anakin. But what impact does Anakin have on Qui-Gon as a Jedi?
Well, I think the very first thing that we should talk about, I've actually been waiting for this part, is Qui-Gon used to have a lover himself. I don't remember her name. I think it was something like Shay. I don't really remember. But we did like a whole video about it some time ago. And it was like Qui-Gon used to have a lover within the Jedi Order. She ended up dying, and that was the closest he was ever brought to the dark side. And so not only would Qui-Gon be able to help Anakin through his feelings with Padme, I do feel like Anakin would trust Qui-Gon enough to bring to him his feelings about Padme. And I feel like by helping Anakin, Qui-Gon would probably start to understand how good positive emotions are for a Jedi. And he would likely come to the conclusion that Revan did, that love actually makes Jedi incredibly powerful.
Right. No, that's a good point. I do think that Qui-Gon probably would have taught Anakin appropriately. I think you're absolutely right. I think that Qui-Gon having that feeling of love in this individual that he cared for, I think that it would instill in Anakin this incredible righteous fury of an individual that loves people, just like Luke would come to learn. That love does make a Jedi strong. I think that Anakin does get with Padme if he's trained by Qui-Gon, and I think that they have Luke and Leia, and I think eventually Anakin probably becomes Grand Master and reformats the Jedi Order. I think that that's the outcome of what happens.
Okay, well, let me ask you this. This is something that just sort of came to my mind. There are certain events in the Star Wars timeline that cannot be changed, no matter like who Anakin is trained by, and one of those is the death of Shmi Skywalker. How do you think Qui-Gon helps Anakin through that event? Because I feel like Anakin would probably still snap and still cut down the Tusken Raiders, getting that taste of the dark side.
Right. And that all stems from the fact that likely doesn't change because Shmi is eventually freed from Watto and does have a family. Is that your line of thinking?
Yeah, right.
I think that Anakin absolutely indulges in the dark side in that moment still. I think that he comes close to it, and I think that he kills the Tusken Raiders, and I think it's awful. I think all of that probably still happens. I think that Anakin maybe he learns from this event, and I think he would have been honest with Qui-Gon and what he did, which is the key factor here, is that he is not honest with his masters. He's honest with Padme, but I think his trust in Padme at the time, he would have trusted Qui-Gon even more so. I think that is probably akin to Luke using the dark side to defeat Vader, but pulling back from it, and that being his cementation as a Jedi. Where I think that Anakin pulls away, the big definitive moment, is I think that if Qui-Gon trains Anakin, I don't think Anakin kills Dooku. I think that he makes the same. I think he makes the same choice that Luke would make. That the Jedi, like Obi-Wan and Yoda, were wrong, and Vader didn't need to be struck down, and Dooku probably didn't need to be struck down. I think that that's the decision. That's where it changes. But to answer your question, I do think he indulges in the dark side in that moment. But I think that just as it happened with Luke, I think that serves to be a defining moment for Anakin, not a step to the dark side, but a step towards the callings of the true chosen one.
I agree. I mean, after the slaughter of the Tuskens, Anakin's anger is festering, and his anger switches to Obi-Wan, and he's all like, he's holding me back and all this other stuff. And I don't think Anakin's anger would have festered after if he were trained by Qui-Gon. I think he definitely would have been remorseful. He would have sought atonement, and he would have confessed out of his guilt. He would have been eaten up with guilt and confessed it to Qui-Gon, in like a big, teary scene. And I think it's at this moment that it would be a huge defining lesson where Qui-Gon would be able to really guide Anakin in the true way that one is supposed to listen to the will of the Force when one is feeling these hot emotions.
That's so true. Sorry, go ahead, man.
Well, no, what I was about to say was, imagine this, right? Imagine So this happens, goes to Qui-Gon. Qui-Gon gives him this really important lesson, and the defining moment that you're talking about is more than just him stepping into the light. It's him stepping into the balance and finding that Grand Master Skywalker that we start seeing in the World Between Worlds, right?
Right.
Yeah.
I find it fascinating that he switches the blame to Obi-Wan in the moment after he embraces the dark side and kills the Tusken Raiders. He blames Obi-Wan for not being powerful enough, not being well-trained enough to defeat the Tuskens. And I think that that's so tragic and so unfair for Obi-Wan.
It is, because, I mean, like, Obi-Wan, not only was he, he was already ready to be knighted, like, that was already established. He mentioned that he was ready to take the trials, and Qui-Gon believed that too. But even as a fresh knight, Obi-Wan had no business taking on a whole Padawan, right after completing his training as a Padawan himself. So it really kind of, I think Anakin was being pretty unfair to Obi-Wan and not really seeing things from his perspective and what he was thrust into as a result of Qui-Gon's death and his dying wish. Even Yoda disapproved of it.
So what you're saying is, although Anakin, his anger is misguided, he does have a point that maybe Obi-Wan wasn't ready.
Yeah. It's kind of one of those harsh truths, because it's like, Obi-Wan wasn't ready, granted, but who else was? Who else was going to take that mantle as Anakin's master? I mean, we're bringing it full circle now.
Right. And it just all speaks to how intricate and profound the character of Obi-Wan is. How in the series he apologizes to Vader and says that he's sorry for all of it. Obi-Wan he holds himself accountable too. But if anyone is a victim here, it's not just Anakin, it's Obi-Wan and Anakin. They are both victims of the Jedi.
They're like both victims of fate, really. I mean, that duel on Mustafar, he even admitted to Anakin that he failed him, during their duel. And Anakin, he wasn't even listening. He was talking about the Jedi Order. And of course, then the focus switches. But, I feel like that Obi-Wan, the Jedi Order is all he knows. But Anakin did know a life outside of it. And because the Jedi was Obi-Wan's family, but Anakin's family was elsewhere, they wanted to be family with each other, but it was like their in-laws, their emotional in-laws, completely disconnected.
Right. The calling was too much for both of them. Mm-hmm. And if they had been separate from the Jedi, and if they had been trained by Qui-Gon, and Obi-Wan eventually goes to Qui-Gon after he is found worthy to pass the Jedi trials, I think that Obi-Wan is probably a little bit resentful that he's cast aside by Qui-Gon in favor to train Anakin at first, but I think that eventually they form a strong brotherhood together, and Obi-Wan has an understanding of why Qui-Gon did this, and in the truest sense of it all, they become brothers.
They do. I mean, and we got to think about the massive weight of expectation that was thrust upon Obi-Wan. Qui-Gon was prepared for this. Like, he was into the will of the Force. He knew how to listen to it, listen to its guiding flows, and he, in a way, was even a master of his own emotions and how he dealt with love and grief and loss. Obi-Wan was dealt a terrible hand, and he was given one of the biggest responsibilities to any master in any era of the entire Jedi Order, training the chosen one of prophecy. And he was just barely a Padawan when it started.
Right. I love the line so much in the Clone Wars movie where Anakin tells Ahsoka that she never would have made it as Obi-Wan's Padawan, but that she might just make it as his. I think that shows, a lot of the pressure that Obi-Wan experienced, a lot of the hardships that Obi-Wan had to deal with for being forced to mature immediately. So,
Yeah,
They're
absolutely.
amazingly complex, beautiful characters, all three of them.
Oh yeah, I mean,
And
this is why we're even able to have this discussion about him, you know?
yeah, absolutely. Let's take a different turn.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that Anakin, when he imbues upon his crystal, trained under Qui-Gon, do you think that it could turn purple?
I think it would have turned green.
You think, oh, interesting. What's your thoughts behind that?
Well, I know this is really controversial because I know a lot of people think that um, Anakin would have been more into the balance of the Force and therefore would have had a purple lightsaber under Qui-Gon's guidance. I think that might have been able to come later, but I think as his Padawan, the very first time he goes to Ilum and gets that crystal, it would have been green because Qui-Gon, of course, in teaching him how to listen to the will of the Force, Anakin being the chosen one, I feel like Anakin would have had a greater appreciation for the mysticism of the living Force under Qui-Gon's guidance, rather than just the physical application as he was under Obi-Wan's teaching. And I think it would have been green because of that, since he was way more in tune with the Force.
I think it still probably stays blue.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, I think that Anakin thinks of himself as the guardian and the steward of the people that he loves.
That okay,
And
this is also true.
and the steward and guardian of the galaxy and of his master and I think that the act of destroying the Sith is a far more active one. It's far more of a guardian of the future than it is, looking into the mysticism of the Force itself. I think that his
Okay, you know
lightsaber
what? I
probably
concede
stays.
to that, yeah.
I mean, it's completely possible that it could stay green. I see your point. I just think that I think it's possible that I think it stays blue. A lot of people in the lore tend to think of one color, green, being more enlightened or the quote unquote better color of a Jedi, and that's not true.
Yeah, no.
But I like your point that maybe perhaps it does change when he gets older. Maybe perhaps he does take in pieces of the dark side into who he is. But I think that it's also even possible that as Anakin gets older, it turns green. He becomes more like Luke did, more introspective, more willing to learn from the Force. I think that the idea of what color he has is super interesting.
You just brought up a great point there. I mean, in keeping with the idea of him wanting to protect his loved ones, I mean, Luke did the exact same thing. But of course, when he became a Jedi Knight and knew exactly what he wanted from the Force, his lightsaber was green. But I mean, Luke fought his whole life. I mean, it wasn't like he was shut up in the council chambers just meditating a whole lot. A lot of times he was lucky to even get a couple minutes to himself to explore the Force. So I think that you're absolutely right in that in Anakin's early years, it would be blue. I think it would probably stay blue right up until the moment that he destroys the Sith. And depending on the twists and turns that his journey takes from now till then, it could either be purple or green, depending on what aspects of the Force he decides to embrace. Because he could very easily decide to listen to his emotions a little bit more, because Qui-Gon himself was kind of erratic in that he was relying a lot on instinct, which is what he would teach Anakin to do. But of course, Anakin's instinct doesn't yet fully mature in the Force. It mostly comes from his emotion. So that could snowball into him having a purple lightsaber. Or he could perfect his ear to the Force and get a green one. It could be either one.
Yeah, it could go either way. Yeah, absolutely. And then to finish things off, a question that I've always thought of is, if Anakin is trained by Qui-Gon, what is Palpatine's reaction? How does Palpatine conduct himself? Because this is someone who built the chessboard that they're playing on. How does he attempt to kill Anakin or to sway Anakin? I think that he tries to kill Qui-Gon and Anakin like much harder. I think he goes after them both as hard as he possibly can if Qui-Gon lives, you know? I think even the biggest step would be trying to convince Dooku to kill Qui-Gon. I think would be massive.
Oh, that is cool. Okay, but first, let me ask you this. If Qui-Gon survived, would Sidious kill Plagueis? Because in the Darth Plagueis novelization, he only decides to kill Plagueis because the dark side whispered to him and told him it was time. When Plagueis got drunk and fell asleep on his couch, Sidious was about to head out until he stopped at the doorway because they were celebrating a victory, not only Qui-Gon dying, but also him getting elected Supreme Chancellor. So would he kill Plagueis? Because Plagueis believed that Qui-Gon would be their doom.
I think he still kills Plagueis for sure.
Okay.
I think he's still elected Chancellor. Mm-hmm. I don't think that Qui-Gon uncovers that immediately. I don't think Qui-Gon suspected Palpatine. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there's a piece in the lore where he suspects him of something, but not anything that I've come across. If any of you guys, if the viewers, know of anything, I would love to hear that, genuinely.
Absolutely.
But I think it was time beyond Anakin coming into the fold. I think that Plagueis' twilight was upon him, and it was time for Sidious to ascend, for sure.
Yeah, and I think after that point, there's just no way that Sidious has a foothold with Anakin because that place, that father role, is fulfilled in Qui-Gon. I think Anakin becomes public enemy number one right next to Qui-Gon for Sidious. And I think his plans have to take a drastic turn.
And I think many people will point to the fact that like maybe he'd be able to take Qui-Gon out easily, but I don't think that's true because Palpatine has tried to kill Obi-Wan a ton and has failed.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
I think they're eventually weeded out. I think that if we want to go even a step further, maybe Palpatine never reveals himself as a Sith. Maybe he doesn't think of himself as the culmination. Maybe they train more.
Oh, I don't know if I agree with that. I think Palpatine's too selfish. He's way too power hungry to accept himself as another link in the chain.
Yeah, you're probably right. Yeah. So do you think that he just grows older and decides to make his move with Order 66 and move on without Anakin?
I think he would have to, unless... Yeah, it's kind of difficult because Anakin first got Palpatine's notice after Qui-Gon's death.
Right.
So I'm trying to think because if Palpatine's not able to get a foothold in Anakin's life, then he probably would have to kill him. But that also opens another problem. Who does he get to kill him? Does he try to do it himself, or does he try to find a Padawan an apprentice who's powerful enough to take on the Chosen One?
I think he sends Grievous after him relentlessly. I think he sends Dooku after him. But with Qui-Gon there and the supreme training that Anakin would get in the Clone War, which I also believe that Qui-Gon would still probably have Anakin join the Clone War because of the loss of life and the sanctity. Yeah, Qui-Gon's not going to stand by and let all this innocent life be destroyed. He's going to take a role.
Yeah, I've always been of the opinion that as one who listens to the Force, Qui-Gon would have been among those who refused to join the war after seeing how heavily political it was.
Interesting. Do you think that maybe they could have been like nomadic warriors helping out planets that needed aid during the Clone Wars without necessarily publicly allying with the Republic? I think that's possible.
Ooh, that would be really possible. I mean, just imagine these sort of nomadic Jedi watchmen sort of traveling around. I mean, I would even say that if Qui-Gon didn't leave the Order at the moment that what we were talking about earlier, when the Council, when they denied him to train Anakin, if he didn't leave at that point, I think he and Anakin would have left at the start of the Clone Wars, and they would have traveled around doing what they could to help out in the way that real Jedi should.
Right. So I guess in the end, they maybe uncovered the plot of Palpatine during the Clone Wars. Maybe they put the pieces together. Is Dooku honest with Qui-Gon? Does Dooku attempt to get Qui-Gon and Anakin to join him and overthrow Palpatine? I think the answer there is it's also likely. The thing with this is if you change this one aspect, you have to look at the entire story differently, and it's almost impossible, because Star Wars is just so layered and complex.
Yeah, it's got so many hooks and roads and intersections. Like, there's no doubt in my mind that Dooku would try to sway Qui-Gon and Anakin, but Qui-Gon is so in with the Force that he would never join the Sith, not even to pretend. Like, I think it would just be hands on sight after that. I think he would have give him a "you've fallen" speech, and then the two would have entered a duel.
So in that duel, what is the outcome of that? Because if Anakin's not there, Dooku could kill Qui-Gon.
Dooku best Qui-Gon without Anakin there, no question.
Right.
I think Qui-Gon probably, he's built such a trust with Anakin during this time. I don't think he goes anywhere without him. So I think if he does go to meet Dooku, he brings Anakin.
Yeah, it's completely possible. But another thing that I think could happen is Qui-Gon would be the Obi-Wan to, like, Luke's Anakin. And what I mean by that is maybe Anakin sees Dooku kill Qui-Gon, but in the end, I think that the decision that Anakin would make to spare Dooku would speak to Luke deciding to spare Vader. I think that that's probably where the story goes.
Yeah, I mean, imagine this. It would be a thing where, Dooku kills Qui-Gon, escapes, Anakin mourns, goes through his own sort of arc where, of vengeance, gets Dooku on his knees, spares him, and then when we see Anakin again, he's like Master Anakin, super powerful in the Force, and he's going to warn the Jedi and confront Sidious.
Yeah, and maybe even Dooku finds some form of redemption. It's completely possible.
I like that story.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's completely possible that Anakin sparing Dooku would speak, tremendously to Dooku, and I think that at that point, Dooku might even look at Anakin as his grandson and see the teachings of Qui-Gon in Anakin.
Yeah, because it was Anakin's arrogance that made Dooku hate him so much.
Right, and under Qui-Gon, he probably would not have been as arrogant at all.
No way.
Because part of why Anakin is so arrogant is just this deep desire to prove himself and his natural power. But I think that Qui-Gon would have accepted Anakin immediately, and he probably would have never had to feel like he needed to prove himself as much as he did as when he was with the Jedi. Obviously, Anakin would still feel a desire to impress and to grow in power, but nowhere near. I don't think he would have this intrinsic need to put himself above the other Force wielders present.
All right, man. Well, is there anything else?
I don't think so. I think Anakin becomes Grand Master after he destroys Sidious and the Sith, and I think he ushers in a new era of unprecedented peace. I think he has Luke and Leia with Padme, and I think he eventually passes on through the Force as the greatest Jedi Grandmaster that ever lived.
Absolutely. Roll credits.
But anyway, my friends, there's so much more to discuss here. Please feel free to continue it in the comments down below. We'll be checking and interacting. This what if scenario and an analysis of this is just so compelling. It's the biggest and probably the most interesting in all of the lore. But
I agree.
Thank you guys again for staying tuned and listening as long as you have, if you're still here. If you want more discussions, request down below what topics you'd like to see us take a more free-flowing look at and analysis of. We love to hear your guys' thoughts, and we'll be sure to keep making more of these. As always, my friends, may the Force be with you, and have an amazing day.